Hello everyone, this is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. Yes, payments to corporations may be reportable. In this episode, we'll talk about the payment types for Forms 1099-NEC and 1099-MISC that are reportable even for corporations. And then I'll also talk about which forms they are reportable on. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 313, when corporations are reportable on 1099-MISC and 1099-NEC. So last week, I had an episode, so it was episode 312, and the name of the episode, I'm trying to get it now, was 3 worst practices with vendor data that lead to compliance fines. And so I was really trying to do the lead up to the IRS tax filing and getting ready for that and make sure that, right, you can distribute vendor 1099s and 1042s and also do the applicable tax reporting with the IRS. And so I was talking about some things, some practices with vendor data that lead to not doing that correctly and resulting in fines. At least 2 of them, I think, were related to the IRS fines. One was regarding watch lists. But in any event, I talked about that. And one of the things that I didn't talk about that probably should have been a 4th mistake or worst practice is when the W-9 is not even collected for the corporation because they are a corporation. Actually, I think I did include that. And the reason that I included it is because, corporations can be reportable. It depends on the type of payment. You actually, to determine whether you need to report a vendor or the vendor's payments are reportable to the IRS, you have to look at 2 things. You have to look at the tax classification, and then you have to look at the type of payment, because a great example is if you have a tax classification or vendor in that first tax classification of individual sole proprietor, that is a reportable tax class. However, if the payment you are making to them is a goods payment, right, for products, then it's not reportable. So you have to look at both of those. So in this case, you have a tax classification, that S corporation to C corporation, that is not reportable. However, there are certain types of payments that make those payments and that vendor reportable. And so that's what we're talking about today. So before we get started, I do want to just make sure I have a disclaimer here that I am not a tax professional. I do, however, most of you are aware of this. I used to be a practitioner. I had a team of 17. All we did was vendor setup and maintenance. We did about 2,000 vendor requests per month. We also maintained 140,000 active vendors across 7 different ERPs. And of those 140,000 active vendors, we probably sent out between 24,000 24,000 and 30,000 1099s and 1042s, with probably about 99% of those being 1099-MISC, because at the time the 1099-NEC hadn't been brought back. And so when I talk about training, I talk about training from being one, certified as a payment reporting specialist, but that still is not a tax professional. But it does mean that, yes, I have the experience and the practitioner education on or training on issuing 1099s, and then also reporting that information to the IRS. So that's the perspective I'm taking from it today, because every time I do training on 1099s and 1042s, the biggest thing is, where do I report something? And so I'll be covering those in some tax training sessions I will have. But I wanted to first talk about the fact that, don't just discount corporations because some of their payments are reportable. All right, so let's get into the type of payments that are reportable for corporations. Okay, the first one of the 6 that I have is cash payments for the purchase of fish for resale. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I know what that is because I've never been in that industry, but if it's $600 or more, then it must be reported, and it would be reportable on the 1099-MISC. And the box you would use would be box 5. All right, the next one, number 2, is payments for medical or health care services. Now, this would also be reportable on the 1099-MISC, and that will be in box 6. The next one, number 3, is substitute payments in lieu of dividends or tax-exempt interest. Now, this one again would be reportable on the 1099-MISC, and it would be reportable in box 8. The next one, number 4, is payments for attorney's fees or gross proceeds paid to attorneys. Now, this one is a little split. If you have payments for attorney's fees, then that would go under or in or on Form 1099-NEC, and that would be in box 1. But if you had gross proceeds paid to an attorney, that will be reportable in or on the 1099-MISC in box 10. And by the way, I love how the 1099-MISC labels all of these, because it tells you where it's supposed to go. I'm telling you the boxes, but it does actually say it on the boxes for most of these, except for when we get to the catch-all of other income, that's box 3. Now, number 5, technically, I probably shouldn't even included this. I probably should have named attorney's fees and gross proceeds as 2 separate ones, but that's okay. Payments made in settlement of payment card or third-party network transactions is what I have listed here as number 5, and those really should be paid on or reported on the 1099-K, which typically we don't do in the vendor team. Now, if you do issue 1099-Ks, I would love to hear from you on that, but I don't think that would be a thing. So for this one, you might have a pass, but it is one of the types of payments that are reportable to corporations or reportable regardless of tax classification. All right, the last one is payments for services by a federal executive agency reported as non-employee compensation, and that would be reportable on the 1099-NEC in box 1. All right, so those are the 6 types of payments that are reportable regardless of tax classification, which means if you make payments to a corporation or any of these payments to a corporation, they are reportable. I'm going to repeat them really quickly. Cash payments for the purchase of fish for resale, payments for medical or healthcare services, substitute payments in lieu of dividends or tax-exempt interest, payments for attorney's fees or gross proceeds paid to attorneys, payments made in settlement of payment card or third-party network transactions, and then also payments for services by a federal executive agency reported as non-employee compensation. Again, I want to point out that I am not a tax professional, so make sure before you actually file your 1099s that you have someone review where you entered in those reportable vendors for all of your vendor tax classifications and payment types, especially corporations, to make sure that you are reporting where they need to be, when they need to be reported, and also on the right form. Now, I will put a link to where I got all this information from. It was really from two different IRS publications. The first one, of course, is the instructions for forms 1099-MISC and 1099-NEC. It has a revision date of January 2024. And then the other one, I actually really like it because it will tell you if you give it or search for a type of payment, it'll just tell you. It has like an index, alphabetical index, right, of where or what form it should be reported on. And it doesn't just limit it to the 1099s or 1099-NEC or 1099-MISC. It'll tell you other forms if you have other types of payments as well. But that is the general instructions for certain information returns. It's the 2024 dated publication. So make sure you check that out. If you are interested. And again, just to kind of double check where you need, what form you need to report your payments on, and if there are corporations, which payments need to be reported, even though they are a corporation, and on what form. All right, guys. Well, I hope this was helpful for you today. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 313th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.